actually, I'm not sure if we should leave this to the end or not, but, and I don't mean to put you guys on the spot here as well, but I feel like this is a really, really good opportunity to properly inform, and it's a good opportunity to change people's perspectives when they usually come across the, today we're going to be learning a bit more about the Treaty of Waitangi again, because the instant knee-jerk reaction to that is, I've already learned it in year 7 and 8. Yeah. And it's just like that's another thing. And it's just sort of like people like, you'll see them physically like sigh and like, here we go. I have to be here compulsorily. And, you know, at the end of it, I might just learn a bit, but I have to do it for the, you know, so I can pass through the course and stuff. That's often what it ends up being. So, in a succinct or, you know, an effective way, what's a way that, you know, if someone with that sort of attitude right now were to listen to you about, you know, and you, how essentially, how would you inform them into, you know, realizing that this is actually important? And it's important that they listen and understand and then act on this afterwards. Yeah. It's a very big thing, and I understand that, but here we go.
She's got it. Well, from med school, we did have that week, and it was so token. And I thought it was great. I learned a lot. I was Rhys Jones, Alana Curtis. I'm just like, my idols.
Love them.
So I loved it. But I overheard other students say like, waste of time, why do we have to do this? And I was shocked. I was like, we have been chosen to literally boost the health of our nation, and you like can't even be bothered for 1 week?
Because it's taking a week out of normally it's out of the holiday, right? The break time.
Yeah, so like that shows how much the medical school considers our Holder Māori program.
Exactly.
Whoa. And that's at no fault of the Holder Māori team, because as was said, they are amazing, beautiful academics, stunning people. I'm pointing the finger at the medical school.
Yep, I'll point it with you.
Yeah. I think Papa Rangi-Reid is amazing. She's a lecturer that we have at med school, or a professor. But I think when she lectures, people might think, God, another angry Māori woman.
She's quite intense if you don't know who she is.
She is a little.
Very entertaining, is what I gotta say.
But I think now that when I speak, I can relate to her, because there's a lot of mamai, there's a lot of pain and trauma. So when we read these stats and we're like, 6 times increased, Māori have 6 times increase of dying from pneumonia than non-Māori. So when we read that, we're like, but when we're like working in hospital with these families, and they may die from such a simple thing, and at a younger age, which means a loss of income for that family, you know, it's not just this one little bit of writing. It's such a huge impact when you and how it affects their family and going forth. Anyway, so I think some people read these stats too lightly and don't think it's, you know, sort of just brush over it and be like, 3 times, that's not that much. It's like, no, it's 300% more than non-Māori. Like, this is outrageous. So I think to get students to listen and why it's important, you literally need to go back to colonization. And I think if people sigh with that word, it means it doesn't affect them at all. And so with colonization, you have, it's an imperialist view of majority informed, you know, superiority of race. When settlers come in, there's, as we know, with Māori, there's loss of land, and it's through different ways, whether it's through confiscation or whether it was bought inappropriately or unfairly. But there's a displacement and a loss of land. That means a loss of food resources and economic resource, but also displacement. So out in Ihumātao, which is an area in Auckland, those people who were living there, the Māori iwi that were living there, were literally given notice to leave their land And it's like, where are you going to go? So they just like literally had to pick up their stuff and walk. So you're displaced physically, economically. With the loss of land, you're away from your marae, so there can be a loss of culture, but also so cultural practices that you can tangibly uphold. But with a majority-informed sort of society, with them making the rules, there's also can be a loss of culture that way, as we know with sort of suppression of language in schools, and so you'd actually beaten. So my grandma was also beaten to not speak Māori in schools, and also given the mindset that you're dying, that language is dying and it's no use in the world that we live in. So my grandma grew up thinking that, and she's like, don't learn Māori, you're not going to use it for anything. And here I am scrambling, trying to learn it. So with this, and then with majority-informed decision-making, then there's, as we saw or heard, like criteria that fits Pākehā, the majority-informed, and European New Zealand, and also informs our ideas. So that can be systemic racism, but then also projecting our stereotypes onto the minority group. That can give them internal racism, low self-worth, like it's so multifaceted, and that can impact your mental health. Honestly, it just keeps the layers just keep going down until what we have nowadays. So when people say, oh, colonization history is just like not having any effect, I'm just like, okay, you need to let's start from when Māori started to become displaced from their land. And so, how that shows out nowadays is Māori home ownership, for example. We're only 28% of Māori population have home ownership, and for Pacific peoples it's 19%, versus the general population it's about 60%. So, there's so many downstream effects of colonization. And why does home ownership matter? Because if you're living in a rental that's of poor quality with mould, overcrowding, there's a lot of health issues that are going to arise from that.
Like the 6 times increased risk of
pneumonia and increased risk of asthma, and skin infections. And if you have diabetes, your skin infections don't heal. It's so multifaceted. So you do have to paint a picture first before you just start throwing stats. Because if you throw the stats in isolation, you just think, what are Māori doing wrong? What is up with them? Why are their lungs so bad? You need to paint the picture first.
Do you mind if because I've tried to have this conversation with other people as well, but the common objection that I then hear, especially with, older people that are not Māori or not Pacifica, is, okay, I get it, colonization was an issue. It's not my problem to fix, though. How do you respond to that?
Just going to jump in, considering, for this audience, since it's a medical-ish podcast with a medical-ish audience, when people say, it's not my problem, my immediate reaction is then you shouldn't be a doctor in New Zealand, because what I have to, if you're wanting to be a doctor, that means that you are in some scope wanting to be a healer for the people in wherever you're going to practice. And if you're unable to adequately cater for the Māori and Pacific population in New Zealand, and, agree that there isn't also enough education around the international population, then, if you can't cater for the community, then your job as a doctor isn't actually really fulfilled. And that's a lot in medical school, sort of ideas that I've heard is, oh, well, the MAPAS program and the MAPAS students, they're coming in here because they're going to deal with the brown patients, that's their job. And it's like, well, no, because we don't just get to deal with our people. How lovely would that be? But we deal with the majority population, the European population, as well as our patients. And it's just, And
depending on where you work, that may be the majority patient population, could be Māori or Pacific.
Yeah, and it's the idea of, if you really, say what, if you believe what you say in your med interview is like, I want to help people, but you're refusing to take into account what Māori and Pacific people have suffered and the ongoing effects of it, then actually you don't really want to help people.
I try to tell my students that are kind of going into medicine that the job of a doctor is not, it's set. It's what the society needed. You're there to fill the job. It's not about what you think being a doctor means to you. Right. It's what being a doctor means. You either fill it or you don't. So if you're willfully ignorant about issues that affect you on a very daily basis, then you're just simply not doing your job. Like, just simple as that. I just think it's so clear cut, like you sort of said.
Yeah.
You're not serving that community.
And as I said, it's sort of reinforced, it's reinforced for us in high school, it's reinforced in medical school, where we don't have any Pacific curriculum, really, in Auckland Medical School. And we have a couple of Pacific lectures, and I mean, that doesn't...
And it's lumped together.
And
it's just like, you're separate islands.
And so the Pacific Islands, I'm from the Cook Islands, and there are 15 islands within the Cook Islands. And I'm only like one nation in the Pacific Islands. So, yeah, we're all lumped together, and we don't have any adequate teaching. So all you're hearing, their version, like the university's version of adequate teaching, is letting you know that your Pacific Island patients are all, not some, as we should be thinking, all going to be poor. They're all going to turn up late. They're all going to be terrible with their medication. They're all going to be eating KFC. They're all going to present late. And I mean, that's the medical school. That's their teaching.
And in physiotherapy school, even this week we're doing a cultural competency week, and they've touched on a lot of topics that you guys have talked about today, and especially just the fact with time pressure that your biases come out, that internalization they come out in your practice. But yeah, certainly I feel as though it's kind of like a tick box kind of thing. It's just like, yep, we've talked about cultural competency now. That's one of the things you have to do. That's done. Let's move on to the next thing. When actually it actually underpins everything that you do, because culture is made up of so many different things, not just where you're from, but also other things. And it's just, I find it strange that it's kind of like a tick box when it's really like it's the entire patient's view and their perspective on everything going forward as well.
So I think it can also be quite simple in small things that we can do, such as learning how to say hello in different languages. Honestly, it just lights up that patient's face when you've identified and been able to, you have to do it correct though. Definitely don't mix up Pacific peoples. But then again, don't go too handies on it, because if you start speaking Te Reo Māori to somebody, that's actually that can be so offensive, because you're not realising due to colonization, they might not actually know their own language. So it can be quite embarrassing if they don't know how to respond. So just leave it at hello, something simple, and that I acknowledge you, and that, I hope you feel safe with me, kind of thing. And then the other thing, back to your question about, it's not my job. I totally agree with you, Justin, that this is why you became a doctor. You need to serve the population that makes up New Zealand or the country that you're in. But also, if you put all the onus on the people who have been oppressed and have a lot of work to do and a lot of things to unlearn from society that have been very harmful, I've got a lot of my own things and healing that I've got to do, then you're going to actually burn us out. And it's not my job to be literally doing what they should be doing and correcting sort of the inequities, their biases. There's lots of things they need to work on. It's not my job.
On that topic itself, Georgia, you were responding more so from the medical perspective, and like, absolutely, I don't think the Hippocratical Oath is biased about who you help. But you've got a duty to in that way. Not that I've done that or know exactly what it says. You guys will probably be better, But I think I can say with some level of certainty that it's not specific to a particular audience there. But I think irrespective of whether someone's from the medical field or not, or whether they have that duty to help that in that way, I was more so just speaking from the general population. I don't know, your accountant or your you know, anyone from whatever field that's part of New Zealand society that is not Māori or not Pacifica, feeling like, you know, typical thing, taxpayers' dollars, why is it going away? Why can't I keep more of it? It's going to people that will misuse it in the end, etc., etc., etc. Again, not everyone.
Just teach them about colonization.
Yeah.
It sounds like the stuff in Herald comments.
Yeah.
It's like the word.
Yes.
If you want to see what New Zealand thinks about our Māori
Propaganda.
Pacific population,
Shocking.
go read NZ Herald and stuff Facebook comments.
People actually think this way, and I think
know,
a lot
sad.
of going back to, you know, we learn about this, and because a lot of racism is internalized because of that systemic kind of effect as well. Like, people don't realize that they have these racial biases in themselves, and they don't reflect on it, and they're sort of like, it's going back to it's not my job, because they just don't see it, because it's not their experience. And I think one of the important things is to learn to listen. And so even, you know, if someone's correcting you or telling you, you know, this is actually my experience, you need to be open to listen to it, because you don't actually, like, how can you comment on that? And that's why, you know, reading the Herald comments is so shocking. It's like, see, it does exist, you know, it just doesn't exist up front in your face all the time, unless you're trying to reflect on it and look for it.
And especially being someone who is like a minority, it's sort of things that only minority people would realise are offensive. And what's one of the reasons I tried to get the role on the UMSA Council is because they, like, if you're not from that sort of minority group, you don't see things that affect us. And also, I remember coming into medical school, I assumed that our entrance sort of interview process was going to screen out people with those views. I really had faith.
No, people learn answers.
And it's talking to people when you're in the medical school that still hold those views, and to some extent you bite the bullet and say, I'm just going to educate, and then and other times you're just like, it's not my job to revisit this trauma and to educate again. And as I said, things that have been, like, those have been reinforced in Māori Pacific people from, you know, kindergarten, primary, high school. We've heard these things, and it's a constant battle for our people to, you know, we're trying to prove ourselves as doctors, but we're trying to prove ourselves as brown doctors. And
female.
Exactly. And I don't think people recognise the struggles that Māori Pacific students go through when you have to turn up and you've got to go the extra step to, you know, prove you're not the orderly, to prove you're not. That's something that a lot of the, you know, big Tongan Samoan guys that I'm friends with, that they've experienced in the hospital, they'll be in, you know, their full clinical gear with their ID. And my dad down in Palmy, he was in scrubs with his stethoscope and his badge, and he went over to help a lady who had trouble breathing, and she said, "Are you the cleaner?" And my dad was like,
you can die now.
he was like, you know what? You were struggling to breathe, and you're going to stay like that. But and it's constantly having to hold yourself in certain ways.
And also, as a doctor, you can't say things like this.
You wish you could.
You have to continually.
I'm not a doctor anymore.
You have to continually show kindness and respect, even though you've been dissed, like absolutely dissed, and it still happens.
So you just go, ha ha.
Like a colleague in our year, you know, they're like, "Oh, you're here to take my food order," and she's clearly in, you know, very nice clothing, stethoscope, and she's like, "No, I'm the doctor." And I told you I was the doctor, you know, like I introduced myself as the doctor. I don't know what else to do. But I think people have those immediate, quick biases because of, and I know Justin wanted to say the Herald is a very crappy newspaper of New Zealand.
You just stole the words out of my mouth.
Absolutely propaganda from one party, which we know which one. People have control over media, and it's, again, often majority informed who has money. And Māori and Pacific people are painted in a certain way by showing again and again negative stereotypes. And so that's reinforced into everybody of New Zealand. So I'm not saying that that Māori person didn't commit that crime. That's true, but they continually highlight, if something happens, they'll point out their ethnicity only if they're Māori and Pacific Islander. They don't say, you know, this New Zealand Pākehā person did this. But that's one point. But then they also only show the same story over and over to reinforce that that is true to what we're like. And that also puts a negative stereotype in ourselves. So growing up, I was like quite ashamed. I was like, oh my gosh, I belong to a peoples who's thieves and criminals. I'm going to have to...
Absolute outlaws.
Yeah, and I was ashamed. I felt so much shame. But then I started following Māori news outlets, and there's so much success that they don't show unless they're maybe a rugby sports player. And they just don't have a balance of stories to, you know, show that don't generalize us because I don't generalize you. You know, if something happens, I won't go into that. But yeah, so they need a balance of stories, and media has a really strong effect on subconscious biases.
And I remember just quickly when after high school, so myself and my friend who was Samoan both wanted to get into medicine, and we both did. And our high school only sent myself and her congratulations letters for getting into medical school, but other colleagues who were Papa'a, who were European, didn't get congratulations letters. It was the only two people that got them were the Pacific Island students.
So it was like an expectation, like, oh.
Yeah, it was like, wow, really good on you. Like, we expected it from the rest of you, but you two, like, well done. And then a girl in high school, in our awards ceremony, if you were near the end of the list, you got, like, a good award. And they didn't tell you what it was. And a girl came up to me because my name was on there, and she said, oh, good to get some colour up on stage.
Oh.
In year, I think it was year 11. Yeah, and it was, oh, man, I had to be sent out of class briefly for that. But, yeah, it just shows exactly what people think about us.
And it happens all the time. And so, and I think during your progression as a med student, it can be quite difficult because you're trying to pass the placement. So you move around to different placements. So you sometimes don't want to step out of line and actually... maybe correct people and educate them because they're your seniors, they're marking you. So for an example, I was in hospital and these two Māori women were about to go into surgery. She's having a C-section. And they were cracking up, speaking in Te Reo Māori, and I was like laughing along to the joke. And the nurse was like, oh, you understand that? I was like, yeah, I'm Māori. And she's like, oh, you mustn't be very Māori. And I'm like...
What does that mean?
I know. It's like I just
said
I was Māori. I can understand Māori and you know, I'm communicating and laughing with them. So I'm not sure which part are you judging my skin? Are you judging my academic achievement? I was quite confused. But you're in a situation where you're with the patient, so you don't want to defame the relationship and her mana, her prestige, in front of the patient, because you need to keep respect and trust for the patient and the team. So you kind of stand there dumbfounded. I'm like, oh, I don't get that comment, but you're allowed to just continually like dismiss me and you know what I say, and I'm not allowed to say anything back at this moment. So yeah, there's lots of issues. Yeah.
In summary, there are a lot of issues.
Okay, I wanna, because we're gone for a bit and it's been an awesome conversation. I think we could just probably go forever. But because this topic was actually recommended and people wanted us to talk about this. And there's a lot of students that are Maori or even not, but just interested in and want to know. What would you tell a current high school student that's, let's say for the sake of this, Maori and or Pacific, who's wanting to get into medicine? What would you say to this person who's maybe doesn't have the type of family background that you had or didn't have the supportive and educated mother that you had? And what would you say to this person who's trying to kind of like run it alone and doesn't have those role models?
I think don't run it alone, because I didn't have those role models when I did get to my med interview finally. It was a disaster. I'm so grateful they let me in. But honestly, I had no practice. I didn't know what type of questions there'd be. So you just put on the spot, and you're really uneducated, I'm sorry. At that age, you're just not quite aware of really big issues, and sort of the effect of colonization, or why they asked me, do you think there should be MAPAS, the Māori and Pacific scheme entry? And I thought, no, I've got A+. I actually don't need to get in this way. Like, nah, I was so dismissive. And it's just like so embarrassing to have those thoughts. But you do need a guide and a mentor. You need to seek that person out, because they need to put you not only on the right track, but just give you a little bit of prep, because we actually don't have that experience to just have wide knowledge on lots of issues. You need to be guided, or else you might miss that opportunity to get in, and we need that representation. And then also I went to the university to see what courses we have to take. So think actually a few years ahead, because if you're going to you need to do physics and chemistry, things like that, you actually need to prep ahead, and you can do it. We're not innately less smart, so you can do it, but you still, again, need to seek out some support. Can't necessarily afford tutoring, but you need to seek out someone who's maybe in that area and is prepared to teach you, so that you can boost your physics and chem and those subjects that may not be on your radar.
Actually, if you come to JTT, you can.
Yeah.
Because we will get. I mean,
but people need to know that.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're in a position where, I mean, even if you're not Māori or Pacific, if you're just limited by finances purely, if you are looking for help and guidance, then contact us, because we've got a network. We can connect you with more role models. If you don't know anyone, then you can connect through us. And again, a lot of the tutoring and services that we provide, we give out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff for free for people that just need it. So just reach out. We can almost always do something for you that's gonna work. And it's really a shame, because I do work with a lot of these MAPAS students, Māori and Pacific Admission Scheme students, who have tried to slug it alone for such a long time, and they then will come to me, halfway through the semester, and it's like, damn, I really wish you'd just kind of reached out in the first place. But there's a sense of kind of like holding back or something, even if they knew they could, they sort of just don't. But, I would just say, from my point of view, please just reach out and contact.
Yeah, I'd say for that question is that for Māori and Pacific, we always find so much mana, so much power in our culture. And so if you're looking at this really daunting task of the idea of getting into medical school and slugging it away as a doctor, like, you can navigate that, and you'll always find strength in your culture, always find strength in your people. And then if you're someone who's very early on in your cultural journey and you don't necessarily have those connections and you weren't brought up that way, like, I know that I wasn't brought up in a way that I was extremely embedded in my culture. Yeah, you find people that help you with that. And if you're like a high school student that's Māori or Pacific, I would suggest getting in touch with MAPAS at the uni, because I would say that of all the support I've had at university, MAPAS has been absolutely immense. Because, it connects you with people in years above, free tutoring, free food and stuff.
People just got sold.
Yeah, I mean, like, free food, free study space. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's really like a family.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I would need that, but the med journey is so long. You do need a supportive family that understand what's going on.
Yeah, and just the main thing is hold on to your culture throughout the whole journey, because you find so much strength in that, and you're gonna need strength. You're gonna need it.
Yeah, don't. If other people might not see the importance of your culture, don't try and, suppress it.
Yeah.
because honestly, it's like your strongest asset.
Your patients will appreciate it, 100%.
I was thinking that we should go through some real quick questions that are common sort of myths or opinions that people hold. We've actually already answered quite a lot of those though. Because I was going to talk about, you know, people saying, okay, MAPAS, it's not fair. You know, it's not fair for the other students because, you know, everyone has to work really, really hard.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think if you've listened this far.
It's a common statement. There was a recent article, I think in the Herald.
About Otago, is that
yeah, right? And it was a little cry by someone who,
Harry.
You know,
good old Harry.
They did get the marks, but what they missed the point was this person trying to get into medicine and didn't get in. It's like, boo-hoo, we're all trying to get those points. And in chemistry, there was 1,000 people and maybe a couple hundred will want to get the spot for 200. In our year, it was 200 spots. So, no, you're not guaranteed a spot because of your academic marks, and that's why they have the interview. Your character didn't match becoming a doctor. So I'm sorry, other people did get it ahead of you. And it's not because, so I did have good marks, and it's so no, I didn't get in just because I went through a scheme. It's actually they, you know, saw the attributes. But then, so why I brought that up is because the person is literally saying that, you know, we haven't made the same achievements and we haven't got to the same level. They're assuming, you know, we just naturally got lower to get in. And that's not true. So many of my colleagues, Pacific colleagues, she got top in all of her papers. So the assumptions are really harmful to think that we're not worthy of also getting into medicine.
Just before the podcast started, I was talking to Georgia about this exact thing, and I wanted you to talk about it again because I think it's really important. And one of the things that she brought up that I haven't thought about before in terms of medical entry is that it's not based on academics. It's sort of the system has made it based on your GPA entirely. And it's sort of that, just that the reason the GPA is so high is because it has become competitive over the years, but that's not the actual requirement and what you need to become a good doctor. So I want you to talk about it some more because that was a really good point.
Yeah, so a lot of the misconceptions that people have about medicine is that you have to be unbelievably, unobtainably genius to be a doctor. And I mean, it's just not true. After you see the people in your cohort. And so it's just not true that you have to be an absolute genius. And the whole idea of the high GPA to get into medicine is only due to the fact that the government can only fund so many people to be doctors. Like, running a hospital is expensive. Running us as medical students is so expensive. And so they've got a certain amount of spots. And the only reason that the GPA for medicine is so high is because that just happens to be one of the things that you filter down in order to get people into spots. And I mean, it's kind of the students' fault that everyone tries really hard for the GPA. If everyone just chilled out,
that's my ideal situation.
Yeah, I mean, then the GPA would be lower. Like, we did it to ourselves. But and the idea, so like MAPAS, I think the allotment right now is something like 70 spots is allowed for Māori and Pacific students. And if only 55 students meet the requirement to be in medicine, then only 55 students get the spots. And the other 15 spots, they aren't then saying, oh, we'll give them back to the, you know, non-Māori Pacific students. Those spots are just then not given out. And so the common idea is that Māori Pacific people in our MAPAS scheme are taking spots from other people. It's just not true. And
it wasn't yours to begin with.
Exactly. You were never going to get those spots. That was never yours. And so it's the whole idea that being a good doctor is surrounded by your GPA. But the reason that Māori Pacific people, that we have those spots and that we will become such great doctors is because we offer something into the system that no one without our experience would get. You wouldn't be able to like work with a Cook Island family the way I would be able to. You wouldn't be able to work with a Māori family. You know, they're the same. And so it's the idea that doctors have academic grades and like that's all you need. It's so not true.
I guess you could link it back to, Justin, how you weren't able to sort of relay the importance of staying for the surgery. So being a doctor, you have the knowledge, we've got the same knowledge, but we, weren't able to portray the importance of that. And so that's when...
It's honestly so hard as someone who's not Māori or Pacific to actually meaningfully... I can feel that lack of connection. And
it's not even just always because, like, language barriers. Like, that's not... It's ideologies, the way you were brought up, the importance of, like, what health means to the individual person is different across cultures. And I think that's where students miss out when they look at medicine, is that they just assume that, because I've got 4 core papers, this is what determines how good I will be as a doctor. When I mean, like,
it's like
that
laughable.
chemistry paper that you do applies nothing to what,
No, and also these people who don't get in and they think they've got a right to get in, it's like, do the degree and try again. There's another 30% who are post-grad, and as we call myself, super grad, who've worked and then come back. There's many of us. There's a few of us. But, keep trying. Don't give up.
If it's really your spot.
Yeah, you can get in different ways. And then the reason why, I had to learn this a bit later on, I didn't have all the guidance at the time, why there is MAPAS, is because we're not going to reduce those inequities without, it's sort of like changing the criteria threshold to ensure that we get the right people in. And why it's slightly lower GPA, I don't know what it is. Didn't need it? No. Why it's slightly lower is because we've started off from a different point. I didn't get tutoring. A lot of us don't get tutoring. I went to Decile 1 school. I didn't have chemistry and physics. So you're starting from a point where you need to boost us up because of all these inequities that have started a long time ago. And so once we're in, we don't get any special treatment. I've got to pass all the exams like you, the clinicals, the written.
And all the other stuff.
And not only that, I've got to go from, not having any of this background to then going up to university level and keeping up with everyone who's sort of been afforded that and groomed to be able to study well. And so when I saw that article, I was like, I think you should actually be congratulating us in what we've overcome, and then now we're keeping up with you. We've overcome all these inequities, and now I'm still standing by you. So I think you should congratulate me for getting it.
Yeah, I mean, you're welcome. But
you wouldn't like, sorry, like that point. I was having a discussion with one of my students a few years ago during the interview workshops, and they just couldn't get their head around the fact that, like the starting line is different, and that actually makes a difference. And from what that really is saying, what that person is, that opinion really means is like, you would see, let's say, 2 people running a race, and one person is like towing a car as they run, and they both finish at the same time, and then you'll say that, oh yeah, the guy that the other dude was like better, or like they were the superior one. It's like, how can you not see the...
They didn't have these things holding them back. There's a nice visual representation on the internet so there's a lineup of people, and he'd call out different things.
The privilege walk you're talking about.
So there's the end of the race. Step forward if you had your university fees paid, and people get. Did you ever have food scarcity? So there's people still standing here. Did you ever get tutoring? Do you have 2 parents? All these things which are protective factors for your life to reach your goal, whether it's education or home ownership, different goals. And then you see these people still back here. They didn't have any of those. And so it's not that they're ill-equipped in the race. It's just that they started a lot further back.
And on that note as well, I'm not going to pretend like I've always been, culturally competent, because I think we all started at a point where we weren't. And I admit that it gives me butterflies now to admit that as well, especially in front of you guys.
It's okay.
But one thing that really helped me to realize, why MAPAS is necessary and why that extra step is necessary is, as crudely as I can explain with my hands right now, if you've got colonization that's, created this offset going on over here, and then we go with what your proposition is, why are we putting so much, why are we favoring them so much more on all these different things? Why not just give equal opportunity? Well, okay, if we're going to go down that pathway, let's assume that, first of all, it's not that simple. Second of all, if there is a direct correlation between equality of opportunity and, better health outcomes after that, what we should expect to see is just that.
And not leveling.
That disparity is still going to be there, so you need an unequal opportunity,
just the word equitable.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm like, when I heard that thrown around in uni, I'm like, I'm tired of these words. But when I fully got it, I'm like, I love this.
Yeah. And you used the word bias before as well, Coralie. I can't remember in what sort of context it was just then. But, even the word bias has a negative connotation to it. You can have a positive bias when it's necessary. And sometimes, you do need to have necessary biases to... to make a better impact and for the bigger picture. That's the thing that really hit it on the nail for me. Understanding that.
I think that just due to the sake of not having unlimited amount of time for these podcast episodes, which I feel always whenever we have a guest, we're going to have to cut the discussion short. But thank you both for coming on. It's really, these types of discussions I think need to be had a lot more. And I'm thinking in my head, how are we going to make it so that as many people listen to this type of discussion as possible?
I mean, clickbaity AF.
Definitely.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. And, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I resonate with this, I think this is a message that's super important, then, make sure to like, comment, and share. Spread the message. No, but seriously, I think it's super important, and hopefully by the time you've gotten to this point, you realize why that's important. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that we've talked about, again, if you're someone who feels like you personally resonate with this is something that this is your future or your life that it's directly relevant to, again, reach out. If you've got a request, if you want us to dive into another topic, if you want to be connected to someone, then just reach out. We're always happy to help. But otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you guys as well.
Thanks for tuning in to Subcut. If you guys have any suggestions for content, please make sure you send it through.
You can get in touch and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, or find us on our website at jttmid.com/subcut.
Subcut is a podcast brought to you by JTT. If you or anyone you know is interested in a career in medicine, make sure to get in touch and check us out at jttmid.com.